So welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce our guest today, Gary Hirshberg, the former CEO and chairman of Stonyfield Farms, the leading organic yogurt company in the world. Gary is an icon in this industry. He invests in and mentors early stage food entrepreneurs and also runs the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute, which has a 2-day boot camp, which I would encourage all of you to consider joining. Is it Gary? Did we just miss that? Did that just happen?
Yeah, we just had our May one done, but we'll have another coming up in November. If people go to hirshberginstitute.com, they can see the schedule.
Great, thanks, Gary. So we're going to jump into this half-hour conversation now with Gary. And Gary, for this session, I'd really like to talk about the personal qualities that it takes to be a successful entrepreneur in your experience yourself, and then in your experience in investing and mentoring in entrepreneurs. So I'd like you to kind of put on your psychologist hat here for a moment, and let's talk about the things that are the hardest personally and professionally about launching a food venture.
Well, of course, it is a psychologist's job, isn't it? Yeah. I think in part because probably the hardest thing is how dynamic the environment is. Obviously, especially right now coming off of COVID, but retailers are still recovering and very much in chaos. And so what comes with the variability or the dynamism is unexpected costs that will hit you from all sides. In my day, as you well know, 35, I always joke when we started Stonyfield, we had a wonderful company, just no supply and no demand. and our big problem was supply. It was very, very hard. That would have been our biggest problem back then. Today, that's not our biggest problem. You've got actually, because of the failure of conventional farming economically for family farms, you've got a long, depending on your area, you've got a long list of long lineup of farmers looking to convert, looking to supply. Obviously, it's no longer a theory. Is organics a $60 billion sector? I would say that today's biggest challenge is what I was alluding to a second ago about the retailers, trade spending, extreme competition. In my day when I started, Don, I would have, if I got a product accepted at a Safeway, I'd probably have about a year to prove myself. Today, of course, they run algorithms. They claim to know within 3 to 4 weeks if your product's going to make it. And one of the reasons they do that is because there's so much money in the space. Well-financed competitors are only happy to give them money to take it in, and that's nowadays how many retailers make their money, not on the sales of your product, but on the new launches. And there's even discontinuation fees. So that gap between the gross price, the price you list your product at that you feel you have to get, and the net price that you actually get is what I often refer to as kind of the quicksand or the valley of death. That's where failure to anticipate that and unrealistic assumptions, first of all, burns out your cash and puts you really at the mercy of investors. But it also, failure to understand that and build some kind of loyal relationship with your retail partner is going to be the most inflationary part of your business right now, more than energy costs, more than supply chain, more than transportation.
So when you started Stonyfield, I know I've read that you started when it was a 7-cow operation. That was probably more cows than employees at that point. And you built
it was, yeah, my partner Samuel and his wife really got it going. And yes, that's accurate.
Okay. And you built it to a $400 million company. Obviously, building the team was a critical part of that function. So yeah. In your early days, how did you resist the temptation to kind of do everything yourself? How did you find the right people? How did you build a team that could take it to the next level?
Really good questions. And again, I want to contrast, in some ways, my early days are irrelevant to today's market. There's just so much money out there. You see these crazy valuations, right? That are, investors are just racing after the fad du jour. Um, you know, it's all about the team. It's all about people. And of course, the challenge is when you begin, your cash burn is your number one concern, right? Most of us tend to be undercapitalized. And as I said a moment ago, there's a lot of calls on the cash. And so you have to, when you make a commitment to somebody to join your company, you have to really be making a commitment that you're going to be supporting them. There are occasional like rock stars. Andrew Abraham from Orgain is my classic. He built his company to $15 million in annual sales all by himself, literally not even an assistant, not a supply chain person. It was all virtual, all outsourced. But when I joined Andrew shortly after that, we reckoned that to get him building a real business, not that that wasn't, but something of the stature it is today, which is closing in on $500 million, we had to really zero in on people. In my early going, and in Andrew's too, because those first hires are so critical, the cost of making a mistake when it comes to hiring a key person is enormous, as all that time invested in training and then, replacing them and so forth. Recruiters, of course, play a role out there, but most of us at the early stages can't afford a recruiter, or at least believe we can't. Some would argue, recruiters would argue you can't afford not to use them. But I would say word of mouth is everything. My best advice, and we learned this the hard way, is try to work with somebody, ideally as a contractor or a consultant or an advisor, before you actually tie the knot. That allows for a less expensive undoing if it's not working. It also gives you ample time to really, because the relationship is key here. The challenge, as you just put into your question, is, where do you start, right? Do you start with sales, which is obviously the fuel to drive the business, or operations? Because the other answer I would have given to your earlier question about the most challenging part, particularly in food, is you only get literally one bite of the apple on quality, right? If there's, if a consumer tastes or smells or drinks something and they're unsatisfied, you're never going to get them back again. They've got too many other choices. And so, really excellent, quality-minded, careful producers, processors, really, really crucial. And I would argue that although sales is the, that's where, the bee gets the nectar and all that, the pollen. I mean, I would say that uncompromising, quality-minded people in your operations side is probably the place I would go for to start.
So how did you think about the various North Stars that you wanted to have in your business, in addition to being a profitable, growing company? What were the other cultural goals that you had?
Yeah, well, just to remind those who haven't heard our story, we began actually literally as a not-for-profit. I mean, intentionally as a not-for-profit. It was a 501c3 organic farming school that my partner Samuel had started. And I was running an ecological research institute focused on carbon reductions, on toxin reductions, on animal welfare, on supporting family farmers, on building healthy soils, all of the stuff that today is sort of commonplace to talk about, but back then no one knew what the hell we were talking about. And but for us, we were trying to be a model. We saw the family farmer as an endangered species, essentially. And we were trying to be a model that by helping that farmer to focus on organics and focus on what we today call climate-friendly agriculture, water-conserving agriculture, agriculture that has a lesser footprint, they could in fact be more profitable. And so what that put us in a position of a real disadvantage, because the added mission then was translated into costs, right? You had to convince farmers to try different practices. They said, well, this is going to be a lot more labor intensive. I've got to charge more. And we said, yes, we know, we'll pass that cost on. But, that was a good on paper, hard to do. When, I launched my yogurts, the cheapest I could make them were 69 cents and everybody win. and most yogurts out there were 3 for $1, gelatinous garbage. There's a bad news, good news today, in terms of your question. The bad news is obviously prior generations have really mucked things up, right? We've warmed the planet, we've toxified our biosphere, we've depleted ecosystems and biodiversity. We've made ourselves very sick between obesity and cancers due to poor eating habits and overuse of toxins. So it's a mess. The good news and happy news is that all of those problems I just mentioned are huge opportunities. The average consumer today under 30 years old doesn't need to be explained any of that. And so if you have authentic, genuine solutions to these things, then you may even be able to get away with reduced advertising, because just telling your story using bloggers, influencers, social media to explain why your product is more carbon entrapping, more water conserving, it promotes biodiversity, helps with people's health. For the most part, the organic foods business is really the preventative healthcare business, which of course is the cheapest form of healthcare there is. So the more you're doing those things authentically, the more likely you are to succeed, let alone survive, and or survive, let alone succeed. But the flip side of that is if you are talking about that stuff but not really doing it, then you're going to be found out. So our North Star then is happily probably more relevant today because by being mission driven, that's what got us through the hard times when we were just exhausted and worn to the bone, and retailers were saying, you got to make it cheaper, and we couldn't. But it was always that, as you call it, that North Star, that guiding mission then, that kept us in the game, kept us in the fight. And today that's now almost a prerequisite to success, because inevitably, if you're launching, you're at a financial disadvantage to someone who's already out there. And so having the added benefit of mission is really a competitive necessity, I believe.
Thanks, Gary. So let's talk for a minute about failure. Failure is an inevitable.
I don't know anything about that.
Right. It's an inevitable part of the entrepreneurial journey, and success, failure, rinse and repeat, having the resilience that's required to understand failures and learn from them and to be able to pivot.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that in terms of your experience, either at Stonyfield or with the entrepreneurs you've invested in or worked with.
Yeah. My favorite quote is Winston Churchill. He said, "Success is the ability to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm." You put your fingers on it. And actually, I'm dusting off a book that I've been trying to get done for 20 years. And I thought it was the story of Stonyfield, but actually it's the story of resilience. I now realized, and a friend of mine, an author, helped me to realize that was the core underlying message. Don, I really believe determination is the most undervalued, essential ability for success. Like I said in answer to your very first question, once you've stepped into the commercial theater, it's just, fasten your seatbelt. There's always stuff coming at you. If there aren't demand challenges, there's supply challenges. If there aren't supply challenges, there's people challenges, there's market challenges, there's regulatory challenges, there's shifting patterns of consumption. There's, like I said earlier, cannibalistic. If you prove, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you prove a successful formula, somebody with more money is going to try to steal it from you, steal your space. And what I say in my Entrepreneurship Institute is, well, first of all, the reason I lead my Entrepreneurship Institute is my theme is you don't have to make my mistakes. You can make your own. You're going to make mistakes, to your point. And the underlying moral of the whole program is, entrepreneurship is not great entrepreneurs are not people who cruise along without falling. It's people who get back up after they've fallen, and the falls are going to happen. And so I think there's two probably critical things I would say about this. One, the reason we start our Entrepreneurship Institute with a deep dive into cash flow, and we teach a very simple tool that I learned in my through the bad old days, as we call them. I mean, I get to a point where I was burning $25,000 a week at one point, and I needed to have daily cash flows, not monthly, not quarterly, not annual. And so I developed a tool, a very simple Excel. You can find it at hirshberginstitute.com. It's my essential cash flow worksheet. But the reason we start and really drum that in is that you can, be resilient. You can do a lot of things. You can go a long way without profits. You can't get anywhere without cash. And you have to know what's going on in your business, and you got to be able to see it coming or you're dead. So resilience, first of all, starts with knowing and understanding the cash burn. Like I said before, for the unexpected trade spend is the big threat nowadays, but it could be other things. And then the second part of that is having a kind of a temperament that allows you to not get thrown off your game when the bumps happen. For me, I didn't, I was the child of a entrepreneur, a father in the shoe industry that totally caved in and collapsed and disappeared during my childhood. And he went from thriving to bankruptcy and alcoholism and all the other consequences and, drugs and so forth in our community. And I watched him again and again just not get phased. He just kept on. And so I didn't quite get that. That was his probably greatest lesson, but it was watching somebody step up again, step up again, step up again. And I would say you got to know what it is that you need, for yourself to be able to do that. And for me, it's exercise. As long as I'm out, once I get sort of cardiovascular going, I can handle most anything. The endorphins kick in. During the darkest days that I was describing with the $25,000 weekly cash burn, I would go at 10 p.m. at night and play tennis with another struggling entrepreneur. My poor wife, at that point, fiance and then wife, wondered why I wasn't coming home to her after our long day. But I told her I would be miserable. You wouldn't want to be with me. I probably would have lost her. And it was free court time at 10 p.m. That's why the 10 p.m. we had no money. But I would go out there. I would whack tennis balls. Sometimes the tears would be running down my cheeks. But then I got calm and I said, okay, I can do another day of this. And so it was that need to just let off the steam that got me through. For other people, it might be a good book. It might be chess. It might be a movie. It might be whatever. But you got to know what butters your bread. So it's cash and then having that internal ability to regain your balance.
Fantastic insight, Gary. I'm going to go out and take a run after this.
Yeah, it's the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you have to think about pivoting your business when you hit those kind of impasse points? And what were the challenges in moving your team in that direction when you had to think about that?
Yeah. Well, let me give you a very recent example with COVID. When we going into COVID, about 75% of our volume was small cups, little single serve cups that you would be used to seeing on the shelf. But during COVID, with people more mouths to feed at home and more financial insecurity, small cups was not what people wanted. They wanted large, they wanted quarts. They wanted to be able to cook things and make them. They wanted multi-packs to feed larger mouths. They wanted what the retailers in my institute and on my webinars all say, they wanted value. And so we had to pivot the company. And that meant the line, the operations, the supply chain, everything to becoming 3/4 value size offerings. And so I went through a dozen of those phase changes. We had whole milk cream on top yogurt when we began until fat was turned into an enemy. And then we had to do non-fat. And we had to find a way to, like you said, get the team saying, hey, you may like this, you may be used to this, you may have your routines done. That's out, we got to do this. And then, fat-free, then fat came back and, you have the lights go on, the lights go off. I would say this to the leaders who are watching. It's the job of the CEO to not be in the present. It's the job of the CEO to live over the horizon, to see what's coming. And the best CEOs are able to establish the faith and trust and confidence of your team that you are going to be their guiding light, that they need to be in the present, paying the bills and making things, the trains run on time, but they have to have a trust and a faith in that you're leading them in the right way. And that's not something you can get just by saying, I'm the boss and do this or you're fired, because people who are not happy or who feel insecure are not going to be great and productive employees. So the key is small steps. Don't bring too many radical ideas to. I would say that my old employees might question that statement coming from me, because whenever I would go for a hike or a run like you, they would always say the worst thing coming out of Gary's mouth is, I have an idea. But you have to learn to pace it. You have to recognize that, people want to do a good job, and you're not letting them do a good job if you're throwing all kinds of wild, craziness at them. So you build that trust, you build that integrity by small steps, supporting them, backing them up, and then also having the confidence to take them out of their comfort zone by showing that you're going to be there. And for us, the best thing that Samuel and I, my partner, who was the creator of the Stonyfield recipe, the best thing that we brought to our mission and to our employees was that we had done every single job that they did. So they knew we could go and we could repair a machine, we could drive a forklift, we could drive a truck, we could do selling, we could milk a cow, and they would see us working alongside them, particularly like when, merit happens, right? When there's a fire, when there's a something that goes out. I had one time, Samuel was slammed into the hospital with a near diabetic coma. He was really the guy who could fix the machines. I had to lie under a machine one night with him on the phone from his hospital bed 40 miles away, with apricot mango and milk dripping on me, repairing it. But the employees seeing me do that said, okay, I can work for and with this guy. So it's about walking the talk, demonstrating compassion and awareness of the difficulty, and still being brave enough and courageous enough to lead where you have to go.
So Gary, I usually end these sessions by asking if there are any words of wisdom to impart, but I'm not going to ask you that, because everything you said has been a pearl of wisdom.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, because I don't have any wisdom, but go ahead.
And I want our students to listen to this Q&A several times so you get fully absorbed what Gary has been talking about, and also think about signing up for his Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute. He's a fountain of knowledge, and as I said before, he is somebody that you want to follow in his path, in what he's done in the industry and what he's done for the people in his community. So thank you, Gary, for your time.
Thank you, and thanks for doing this. I would say one last thing though is just don't worry about mistakes. They're going to happen. Just plow right through them. If you don't make mistakes, it's because you're not trying stuff. So,
okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, Gary. Be well.
Take care. Bye-bye. You too.